You're watching Telesur English from our headquarters in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Carla Gonzalez. Let's begin. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Both leaders have discussed ways to strengthen cooperation between both nations. New economic alliances and the trade of oil and gas are key topics. Maduro is searching for allies to boost Venezuela's economic recovery program and to fight against the economic war and sanctions that the country is suffering. Let's hear from our correspondent in Moscow, Hansel Oro.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have met in Moscow with the goal of strengthening bilateral ties between the two countries, particularly focusing on the economy and trade. The Russian president has condemned foreign pressure imposed by the U.S. to try to change the Venezuelan system. Putin has also strengthened the will of the Venezuelan president to continue political dialogue to solve the country's internal issues. Both countries have important collaboration projects related to energy, where they will work together to explore oil deposits in Unices and Carabobo. Russian energy company Gazprom is willing to reinforce the quantity of Venezuelan oil exports coming from the area of Maracaibo Lake. The Venezuelan and Russian delegations are also discussing ways to exchange knowledge in the field of defense. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has also rejected the sanctions imposed by the U.S., not only against Venezuela, but also against Russia. 1 year ago, Maduro was here in Russia proposing the creation of common alternative currencies to avoid the dollar, something that has been supported by the Russian president. Trade between the two countries in 2017 was worth over $68 million, and between January and September of this year, it reached $79 million, showing an important increase.
That was a report from our correspondent, Hansel Oro. Now to Mexico. Researchers are interested in this migratory phenomenon that has led to thousands to seek asylum at the border in northern Mexico. Let's learn more.
Mexican social experts have been researching the Central American exodus for 16 days. After traveling over 4,000 kilometers, migrants established themselves in Tijuana to apply for asylum in the United States.
Why does this number stand out, if in fact it represents a very small fraction of the people who travel through Mexico? I would answer that is because they are visible for the first time.
Researchers are trying to answer questions about the society lived in by the thousands of Central Americans at the border.
There's no proof that crime has risen because of these people. On the contrary, we see that this group has a lot of potential to integrate into this city's productive life.
Analyzing decisions taken before the migratory phenomenon, they are denouncing the lack of planning by the authorities.
A lot of actions are being improvised rather than planned. There is more capacity to house people in the Barretal, but that doesn't mean conditions are more dignified.
The xenophobic behavior expressed by a minority in Tijuana is also being studied. There is a specific cause behind it.
These demonstrations of rejection shows an inability on the part of the government to solve this issue.
Over 5,000 migrants are currently housed in shelters across Tijuana. They left their country seeking a dignified life. And today, they have to face the decisions of a frontier government that is just improvising.
And on this topic, we have our correspondent, Pablo Perez, with the latest from Tijuana.
Well, it's been now 17 days since the first migrants arrived here at Tijuana in Baja California, in the northern part of Mexico, the border with the United States. And, well, social scientists have been studying this social phenomenon for close to a decade. And what they have come to is very interesting, because they say this is a very small fraction of the total of the people that cross Mexico every year on their way to the United States. It's a number that's calculated to be around 380 and 400,000 migrants a year. So the peak of this caravan there was calculated over 9,000 migrants. It's just a small fraction of this total, and it seems that it only was made important because of all the media attention it gathered. And one of the interesting conclusions is that it gathered them because of all the attention that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, put on them on his social networks trying to get some political weight for this election. But otherwise, they say this migration is well into the standards of a normal migration movements here in Mexico. Another interesting thing they say is that by no means this migrant caravan, this contingent of people, poses a security risk for the city. But on the other hand, is in case they choose to stay here in Tijuana, they are a strong workforce available for all the industries here in this part of Mexico.
That was Pablo Perez from Mexico. A Central American migrant family stranded in the Mexican border were filmed breaching the fence to enter the United States. The migrants who crossed over in Tijuana are expected to be detained by U.S. authorities, but still hope that their claims for asylum can be granted. The migrant caravan set off in mid-October and is consisting mostly of Hondurans. The administration of President Donald Trump has adopted a zero-tolerance policy and has militarized the border to prevent the migrants from gaining entry. And further east, the U.S. border with Mexico closed briefly on Tuesday as Customs and Border Protection officers carried out a drill. Long lines of vehicles built up at Tecate, at the border fence, as the officers prepare for any attempt by Central American migrants to enter the U.S. President Trump had promised that the asylum requests will not be considered if the migrants cross the border illegally. Mexico will have a National Institute for Indigenous People aimed at promoting indigenous rights. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has announced a new law to help indigenous communities. This measure follows López Obrador's campaign promises of supporting indigenous people in the country. They still suffer from discrimination and statistically more poverty. Negotiations are underway in the third day of the United Nations Climate Conference in Poland. Now let's go live to Katowice in Poland and our correspondent Watmore Makokowa. Hello, Watmore. Good to see you. So let's
how
talk,
are you?
Yes, let's talk about this conference. It's meant to agree with the guidelines for implementing the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. Can you tell us what that involves?
I think what is happening here, there are major developments that have happened, I think, with the announcement of countries like Germany also coming on board, pledging more funding towards climate change. But there are also very contentious storms that are still happening where problems might happen. There is an issue of developing countries actually giving conditions to developed countries, giving conditions to developing countries that if that funding is going to be given, it has to have some strict conditions whereby it has to be used towards strict climate change. There is an issue of countries like Chile, like Colombia, and other African countries which have been said that if that money is going to be, that fund is going to be channeled to their there have to be some strict control measures so that that money is used efficiently. I think these are some of the major challenges that might arise from this conference. As I speak, yesterday, those are some of the issues that have been coming out of the talks that are happening here. And tonight, this is an issue again, which is proving to be a challenge.
So, Watmore, at this opening session that happened on Monday, we heard these warnings about the danger to human civilization from climate change. And how far is that reflected in the negotiations happening?
I think this is one of the topical issues that is also coming out of the COP24. There is an issue of the transition from relying on fossil fuels, and then now other countries are saying, especially countries that produce coal, like Poland here, where the COP24 is happening, are saying if there is to be just transition, there has to be some consideration into some social issues like employment. There there has to be some consideration into some social and economic issues so that the transition, it doesn't have to affect the lives of people. So people are still debating and trying to come up with a way of making sure that if this is going to happen like sustainably, there has to be some ways of making sure that it does not affect the lives of people who are employed especially in the core sector.
Yes, and on that topic, have you seen any pressure from negotiators, from environmental campaigners, activists? We usually see them outside the conferences.
There is, sure. There is, I think you have heard of a issue of a young girl who's also speaking a lot and also actually demonstrating that leaders have to be serious. And then there are also demonstrations coming from developing countries like indigenous people who are saying that the processes that are happening, people are not considering the plight of the poor people. The leaders, especially from developed countries, are not considering how the transitional processes can affect the ordinary life of the people. But it's to a minimum. There are no major demonstrations happening that are very significant. It's only here and there, but people are trying to register their voice so that they express how they feel about the negotiations.
Thank you very much, Watmore. We'll keep an eye on that topic as well.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we'll take a short break, but don't go away.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. On Wednesday, women in Argentina are set to protest against a court's decision on the rape and murder of teenager Lucia Perez. Outrage is spread in the country as the three accused of the murder of the case were found not guilty on November 28 last year. The court said the abuses could not be proven, despite the fact that they offered drugs and took Lucia to their home. Feminist groups say this is further evidence of the lack of gender perspective in the judiciary. To tell us more about the protests, we are joined live by journalist and activist Jimena Chinca. She's also a member of Global Women's Strike. Hello, Jimena. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Carla. Thank you for the communication.
Yes. Can you tell us more about these protests and what are women demanding?
Well, we are demonstrating last November the 26th against violence against women, where we known about the judicial decisions to find Lucia Perez murders not guilty. So during the last few days, the women's movement in Argentina decided to protest today against the judicial decision and against violence against women in Argentina. Lucia Perez was a teenager of 16 years old, and she was found dead in October in 2016. And her death was the point in which Argentinian movement decided to also take another strike in 2016.
So, Jimena, Lucia's case is not unique. There have been a series of controversial sentences, not only in the country, but in others as well, and they're all based on gender. So what can be done to trigger a change?
Well, we think that these murders against women and violence against women in Latin America is still keep Latin America is one of the most dangerous continents in the world. In fact, our girls, teenagers girls, are in danger just for being women, just for being girls in our country and in the rest in Latin America. The problem is that budgets are not enough and that the conservative governments and administrations in Latin America are not taking serious policies, serious decisions so as to protect women, so as to educate people in general against machismo, which is a great problem, a serious problem in Argentina and the rest of Latin America. That is why violence against women and violence against girls is naturalized in our countries.
So do you have any other actions planned, maybe a connection with feminist movements across Latin America?
Yes, well, Niuna Menos, you know that Niuna Menos was born in 2015 in Argentina because of another femicide against teenagers named Chiara Paez. And that is the movement is growing around the continent and around the world. And that's why we are thinking that this is not going to stop. It is going to grow no matter if judicial authorities or the government are not taking enough policies to protect women in our countries.
Indeed, a very important issue. Thank you very much, Jimena, for your time.
Thank you.
Now we go to other news. The Bolivian Electoral Court has allowed Evo Morales to run for president. Morales can now be elected in his party's primary elections ahead of presidential elections scheduled for 2019. The current president could be re-elected for a fourth time, and the Bolivian Vice President Álvaro García Linera will also be able to stand on the ticket. Now to Colombia, where the National Electoral Council has said it will investigate Senator Gustavo Petro due to a video scandal. Footage was released showing Petro receiving money, which the senator admitted that he received in 2005, but said he did not commit a crime. Petro said the video seeks to end his political career and silence the Odebrecht corruption scandal investigations in Colombia. Nobel Peace Prize winner Adolfo Pérez Esquivel from Argentina has reached out to the Ecuadorian government due to the, quote, critical situation of former Vice President Jorge Glass. The Argentinian activist has sent a letter to President Lenín Moreno sharing his concern over the health of Glass. Esquivel says the Ecuadorian government has a duty to take care of the former vice president. Glass is currently in prison on charges of alleged corruption and has been on hunger strike for more than 40 days. Our correspondent here in Quito, Cristian Salas, tells us more.
Different Latin American leaders have requested that the Ecuadorian government take care of Jorge Glass' health. Glass has now been on a hunger strike for 45 days. The request was made through a letter sent to the President Lenín Moreno, which is already circulating on social media. It was sent on the occasion of the inauguration of the new Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
That was Cristian Salas from Quito. And the presidents of Ecuador and Colombia met at the 7th binational cabinet meeting to discuss issues related to security, the environment, the economy, and the situation at the border.
The Ecuadorian president, Lenín Moreno, and the president of Colombia, Iván Duque, met at the Palace of Carondelet in the binational cabinet meeting of cooperation between Colombia and Ecuador.
The National Attention Center is a big step forward in our relationship and allows us to address citizens on both sides of the border. I also highlight what we have expressed on security. We have reaffirmed the fight against drug trafficking and organized crime.
President Moreno said that even though it's important to fight against drug trafficking and organized crime, they shouldn't lose sight of one of the main objectives of the government, fighting poverty.
We have to emphasize that we have confirmed a border fund to move forward with projects that we have in common. We're pleased that the commitments made in Pereira have been fulfilled, and we have been told that what remains is soon to be completed.
Another urgent issue was the violent situation at the border. Before addressing this, the Colombian president expressed solidarity with the families of journalists murdered at the border, adding that he will do whatever is possible so that the people behind these actions pay for what they did.
Almost half of Argentinian children and young people are poor, according to the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. The UN report revealed that 48% of infants and teenagers are living in poverty. This measures education, social protection, and housing, among other factors. And poverty is not uniquely linked to the economic situation. The same study said that 38% of Argentinian people suffer from at least one of these shortcomings. December 8th marks the 21st anniversary of the tragedy at the Virgen de la Asunción Children's Home in Guatemala. There have been few advances in the criminal process against the accused.
It will be 2019 by the time the trial against those accused of the tragedy at the Virgen de la Asunción state shelter in Guatemala begins, in which 41 girls lost their lives. The parents of the victims seek justice despite delays in the case.
We are looking for this to really move forward, because the truth is that the trial has been delayed a lot and there are always obstacles.
Justice will help these families close this cycle of pain. The report presented by the country's representative of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights asked that the survivors of the tragedy not be criminalized for what happened.
In addition to waiting for justice, the victims demand dignity. Society criticizes them and looks at them with disgust. It looks at them as if they were girls who do not deserve to be loved, who do not deserve a family, who do not deserve opportunities to be part of the agents for change in Guatemala.
Up to now, little attention has been given to the surviving girls by the state, despite the fact that they were promised a lifelong pension and psychological assistance.
The situation we're going through is very hard. It's lamentable and really sad for us mothers. So we're demanding to know what really happened and whether the state is guilty.
What we need now is a response from the state. We need change and total commitment from society and the state, which has to guarantee our rights.
The case of Virgen de la Asunción home will be one of the great tests for the country's judiciary next year, when the defendants face trial and the truth of what happened behind the tragedy that took the lives of 41 girls is made clear.
In other topics, the first baby has been born from a uterus transplanted from a deceased person in Brazil. A healthy baby girl was born in Sao Paulo after her 32-year-old mother received a uterus transplant from a woman who had died from bleeding on her brain. The mother, who was born without a uterus, underwent a 10-hour operation followed by fertility treatment. There have been 39 uterus transplants from live donors, but the 10 previous attempts from a dead donor had failed. We have more stories coming up. Stay with us.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud, amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
And we're back. A Spanish court has condemned the 5 members of the wolf pack to 9 years in prison for sexual abuse. Demonstrators took to the streets around the country to reject the sentence. The men were accused of assaulting and gang raping an 18-year-old in 2016 during the San Fermín festival. 2 out of the 5 judges said the group had to be condemned for sexual aggression and face 14 years in prison. Let's hear from our correspondent, Adriana Cardoso, with more details.
The Supreme Court of Justice in Navarra has ratified the 9-year sentence for the 5 members of the group known as the Wolf Pack. In April, they were sentenced to prison for sexual abuse, a sentence both parties appealed to. But the Supreme Court has confirmed the sentence. 2 of the 5 judges in their particular vote said they should be condemned for rape instead of sexual abuse, as they considered the 5 men used force and intimidated the victim. The public prosecutor and the victim's lawyer asked for a 14-year sentence. The sentence prompted a series of massive demonstrations in which millions of citizens took to the streets to reject the decision under slogans such as "Sister, I believe you," and "It is not abuse, it is rape." The Supreme Court has said that another case should be opened on the charges of violation of privacy, as the accused recorded a video of the abuse. One of the men also stole the victim's phone and he got a 900 euros fine. But now the court says this case should be reviewed for potential stealing by force, punished with prison. For now, the 5 men are on provisional release after serving 2 years of preventive detention. The court also rejected a request made by defense to dismiss the case, saying the process has failures due to social and media pressure. But the court said the trial was fair.
That was Adriana Cardoso from Spain. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged BRICS countries to find ways to build inclusive growth and multilateralism. Speaking at the opening of a gathering of political parties from the BRIC countries in Pretoria, Ramaphosa said political parties must work hard to reverse the rise of the right-wing nationalism across the world. This gathering was attended by delegates from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Towards building what we could call a common agenda, which is about inclusive growth and multilateralism in the 4th Industrial Revolution. We must be concerned about and seek actively to reverse the rise of narrow and extreme nationalism, which is taking root in some parts of the world.
At least 15 migrants have died on a boat off the coast of Libya after spending 12 days at sea without food or water. According to authorities, only 10 out of the 25 people on the boat survived and are currently being treated for severe dehydration. In recent years, hundreds of people have died off the coast of Libya attempting to cross to Europe. The majority come from the sub-Saharan Africa and fleeing wars and poverty in their home countries. Now let's take a look at other stories from around the world.
Yellow vest protesters in France are maintaining their blockades across the country. This, despite measures delaying tax increases announced by the government on Monday. Demonstrators say the temporary measure will not alleviate the effects of taxes on electricity, gas, and other goods.
I'm deeply disappointed at the announcement because honestly, France provides for us in the short term. They tax, they remove the tax, they put it back. There's no long-term strategic vision on employment. I think what was announced does nothing for us. So there you go, in simple terms.
A delegation from Yemen's Saudi-backed government has left for Sweden to attend peace talks with members of the Iran-aligned Houthi group. It's a renewed UN push to end the war that has torn the country asunder for 4 years. The conflict has killed tens of thousands of people and left more than 8 million facing famine. Scores of people were arrested in Italy and other European countries in a raid on the 'Ndrangheta cocaine trafficking group. Officials say it is the largest sweep of its kind. There were 41 arrests in Italy, 21 in Germany, 14 in Belgium, 5 in the Netherlands, and 2 in Luxembourg. This, according to European police agency Europol.
And with that, we end this news brief, but there's another stories, as you know, you can find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And we're also on social media, so go ahead and follow us. Thank you for watching Telesur, connecting the Global South.